Roll for Crit is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Come roll with us at patreon.com/rollforcrit.
The world of tabletop is a fantastic hobby to be a part of, but maybe you're new to this world. Maybe you just had your first chance to sit down and play a game like Catan and you're excited to build up a new collection. Maybe some gnomes have stolen your memories as well as your original collection and you need to start off from scratch. We're here to tell you 16 games we think are essential great picks to start off with that not only are good games, but ones that you'll probably keep in your collection until the end of time.
Yes, if you are a gaming veteran, you'll probably be familiar with a lot of these titles, but if you're someone new to the hobby, then there are a lot of excellent picks here, and all of them are games that we have enjoyed and that we think are essential starting out and that will have a long-lasting shelf life, hopefully. You'll have to see and find out which games are exactly to your tastes, but these are our picks. We will start it off right away in alphabetical order, so no preferential order here. The first one we're going to talk about that we think is essential for your collection is Azul. This is a tile drafting game in which players are in Portugal and they are taking part in the great art of Portuguese decorative tiles, and you're drafting different colored tiles from a shared area in the center of the gameplay area, and you're bringing them to your own personal board, and you are trying to align them onto your board, and you're going to score points for the various places you put those specific colors, as well as for filling in rows and columns. And the challenge of this game is knowing which tiles to take and when, so you might want to take them before other players can get them, just to spite them, or before they can take them from you and you really needed them. This is a perfect game if you are a fan of classic puzzle-style games. It's beautiful to look at, which always helps. And if you are into this style of game, a couple of other ones we would recommend that kind of fit into this same category are Calico and Sagrada that you might want to look into as well.
All of these games, but definitely with Azul, will have these components that when you bring to the table, people are going to be like, oh, board games can have nice pieces like this? And if you really do enjoy this, there are some Azul spin-offs that you may want to try out as well, if this is the kind of game that fits what you like. Next up is Cartographers. This is going to fit a really nice kind of genre called roll and writes, either flipping cards or rolling dice. And depending on the results that show up on those, you're going to add them to a sheet. In this case, it's going to be a map. In Cartographers, you are exploring a new land, and you'll be flipping over cards that usually fit to a certain shape and terrain type. You'll be adding these to your board, and at the end of each season, scoring your map depending on what's going on in the score track, such as having forests near mountains, or making sure that you have a very large group of the red village spaces. There's also going to be monster cards that will creep up, in which you will pass these to other players, and they'll draw on your map, which will add some difficulty for you to play around. The roll and write genre is huge and it's become very popular, but Cartographers is one of our favorites. We think it does the right amount, not being too complicated with just adding like a lot of numbers, but it's still got a lot of great strategy, and those monster cards will add a lot of variety to your games because you're actually interacting with other people's maps instead of just playing your own little solo game. Speaking of which, it does also have a great solo game, so if you can't get people to the table, you can also try that out as well.
Yeah, it's just very, very fun to get the chance to actually write with pencils on your game components. There's a reason I think that this genre has swept the board game nation, so absolutely worth looking into. Very, very appealing title. Now, next up, we are going to look at one of our favorite word-guessing party games, and that's Codenames. In this game, you split up into teams, and each team has a code master who is giving clues to try to get their team to guess some of the words on the table. However, some words are not going to be beneficial to them, and one word, if they guess it by accident, will have them lose the game. The other catch is that the codemaster can only say one word as their clue, along with a number which tells you how many of the words on the table that clue applies to. So this one requires a lot of reading your teammates, knowing what they're going to understand as a clue, and also just puzzling out on the table what words you can possibly use as a clue. Something that, if you like things like Password, those classic kind of word guessing games, or even Taboo, perhaps, this is right up your alley, probably. It's very, very accessible. Everybody loves this game. It also has spin-offs where there's a version with pictures, there's Marvel code names, there's Disney code names. So there's all kind of options for you there. And another one that we're going to mention right alongside it is Just One, which is a similar kind of a game, but in this one, again, you are giving just one word clues, but one person is the one who has to guess the words and everyone else is trying to help them out. Very fun party games if you like that kind of thing.
These are great games that allow a lot of creativity to be brought to the table because you have to use specific words and try to maybe play to your other players what their knowledge base is. But if you don't know each other, it's still very easy and it won't be like, because you don't share the same inside jokes, it still won't be an entertaining time. Now, the next game is one of the newest games, I think, on our list, and definitely a very hot one, and that is The Crew. This is a cooperative trick-taking game when you are all trying to work together to make sure certain players are able to get certain gatherings of groups, aka tricks. Now, what makes this one really great for your addition to the shelf is one, cooperative. I think it's always great to have these kind of co-op games there. The other thing is The Crew actually has missions. It has 50 different missions with tutorial ones in the beginning, so you can sort of learn all the different mechanics as you go through at a reasonable pace that doesn't feel like it's talking down to you. Some great alternates to The Crew that are classics in their own right are Hanabi, The Mind, and The Game, which actually all do share one rule that I forgot to mention. You can't talk during the game. So maybe a great game to break out when you have someone who's maybe a bit too chatty and you like things to quiet down a bit.
Yes, these are very interesting puzzle-solving games about reading each other, a very different kind of experience than maybe you're used to in some other traditional games. Next up, we're going to talk about Dixit. Dixit is a party game all about beautiful artwork on cards, and players are trying to interpret what they mean. One person is going to proclaim a clue of some kind. It could be a word, a sound, a movie title, anything that they want. And everyone is going to try to choose a card from their hand that best matches whatever they indicated. And then everyone has to try to guess which of those cards the original person played. So everybody's going to have a very different interpretation of what that thing might have meant. It's going to create a lot of very interesting discussions as to how we see things in our brains, maybe some arguments perhaps, but all in good fun. It's the kind of game that is competitive, but I think everybody has a good time with it. It's super easy to play, easy to learn, and by the end of it, you're going to have some funny stories to share. If you like the style of Dixit, but you want to take it to the next level and make it a little bit spookier, another great recommendation is Mysterium, which has very similar gameplay style.
I love Dixit and Mysterium as well. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's one of those games like, yes, it's competitive, but honestly, when someone reaches the end, I'm disappointed not because if I won or lost, but because the game is ended. Moving on, we have Jaipur, and this is for all the two players out there. In this game, you are trying to get the best resources as you're trading, but in order to get resources, you're going to have to either trade in camel cards into the center, but that means someone else can collect all the camel cards, meaning they can trade for even more resources. It's a really fun back and forth that isn't going to be too complex and is really just, it's one of my first two-player games I ever got, and it's just such a blast. Now, if you're looking for other two-player games, we actually did a top 10 list on two-player games, so that's probably a good place to start, if anything.
Yes, you will find plenty recommendations there that are also great, essential entry-level games. But by Jaipur in particular, I think has a special kind of charm to it. It is very easy to play, quick. You can do a bunch of rounds, and another one with shiny, colorful things you're collecting. Very cute and fun to play. Now we are going to move on to a tile-laying game called King Domino. In this one, players are drafting different tiles and adding them to their own personal kingdom, making sure that they match up and align with the other domino tiles that they have already added to it, and you're trying to score points by the end of the game for your connections and having crown symbols that you've acquired on the different tiles. It also matters which tile you take, in that the better tiles are going to result in you having a later turn order later on, so you have to decide if you want to take something that's a lot better, but later on you might have less of a chance to get something that you really need. And the game ends when everyone has a complete set of tiles, which is always fun. Win or lose, you get to have this little kingdom that you've created that you can enjoy. The classic tile laying game that most people go to in this case is Carcassonne, which is another option if you like this style of game, and there are countless expansions for that one for you to add on to and change up the gameplay.
King Domino is a great one, and it actually has sort of siblings, including Queen Domino, a bigger version, and actually a King Domino for kids. Though I would argue that King Domino by itself is pretty agreeable for most age groups. Now, this next one is a favorite of mine, and for anyone else out there who is a monster or kaiju lover, and that's King of Tokyo. In this game, you play as giant monsters ravaging Tokyo, and your goal is to get the most victory points before the other players. Now, you're going to do that through plenty of card upgrades you're going to get as you get bigger, badder, and stronger, but also being the one in the center. It's sort of a king of the hill kind of aspect. Now, when you're in the center, you can beat up on everyone else, but everyone now gets to beat up on you. This is primarily done through dice rolling, so if you really enjoy the randomness and just rolling big dice of symbols, but you're sick of just rolling and moving, this is a great choice for you. There is also King of New York for those who maybe want to do something in New York City. That adds a bit more complication with destroying buildings and some armies, and they are sort of compatible with each other. So if you want to bring one monster from one city to the other, you can.
There are also some great expansions available for King of Tokyo that will make that one a little bit deeper. A great dice rolling game if you're a fan of monsters, or even something like Yahtzee. It kind of takes that in a more interesting direction. Now we're going to talk about Love Letter. This is a game in which you are competing with other players to try to send your love letter to the princess. The way you're doing that is by playing a card on your turn and trying to be the last person remaining by the end of the game by perhaps guessing other players' cards or playing cards that will do something to eliminate them. This is all about trying to deduce which cards your opponents have, and there are only a small number of cards in the game. Traditionally 16, I think, but different versions have added some here and there, and each card has a number, and if you are still alive at the end of the game, the number card that you have, whichever person has the highest number, is the winner. But most of these rounds are going to last maybe around 5 minutes, and probably everybody's going to get eliminated before it comes to that. A really fun, clever game that with a very small amount of cards results in a lot of clever thinking, trying to read each other. And I think this is a perfect filler game. And the reason I think this one is essential is it really fits into any kind of game night if you're waiting for more people to show up, or if you just want something to have a little breather in between larger games. This is perfect for that.
It's also got plenty of different themes to fit whatever you're looking for. You want a Christmas theme one, Batman, Lord of the Rings, they've got it.
Yeah.
So they can make Love Letter fit whatever your needs are. Now, this one is not a stranger to any board game player, and that's Pandemic. In this cooperative game, you are trying to stop 4 diseases from spreading and wreaking havoc around the world. These diseases will be placing cubes into different cities, and you'll have to work together to spend cards to find the cures, as well as removing cubes from the board to try to hold off until you can find that cure. This game is a classic for a lot of people and has sped off into so many different versions that you can explore after this, such as even smaller ones that just focus on one continent, to even longer games with the legacy aspect, which means that your choices will matter from game to game. It's a classic that everyone has played, and I think if you need a cooperative game on your shelf, this is one to have.
It really is the quintessential cooperative game. Definitely one that you're going to want to look into. Or if you want something for younger kids, perhaps, you can look at the Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert series from the same designer. Now we're going to check out Splendor. Splendor is a game that takes place in the Renaissance, and players are gem miners trying to get gems, build new mines, and impress the nobles. You will be taking these big, hefty gem chips that are fun to click together and play with in your hands as you play, and using those in different combinations to purchase cards on the table. Or you can take a card and reserve it for later on, just so nobody else can get it. And then as the game goes on, you'll be getting more and more gems, and eventually purchasing these nobles, which will give you points so you can win the game. This is a real classic, a modern classic, I'd say, that everybody fell in love with immediately. Again, very accessible and easy to play. And this is one that, like I said, those chips, the components of this one, really add a lot to it and take it from maybe a more basic game to something that is really enjoyable just on a tactile level for people to play with at the table.
It's also a really great introduction to the engine aspect, in which you are sort of building up what is called an engine, pretty much getting stronger and stronger, and sort of starts running on its own to help you reach that end game point. Speaking of engines, one of the most popular ones are deck building games. These are games when you start out with a simple deck of cards, but you'll actually be purchasing cards throughout the game to add to your deck, making it stronger. And there are so many deck building games out there we love, but we think the one that you should have on your shelf is Star Realms. This one is a lot smaller. It's got a cool space theme with different groups. And there's a ways you can expand whether you want 2 players, 4 players. And I think it just scratches a lot of the itches that for people who like deck building games without being too confusing or adding too many other mechanics.
Yes, there are so many out there. In fact, this is another one we did a top 10 list for. So if you really get into the deck building genre, that's a great video to check out to find even more suggestions in this category. Now we are going to look at a drafting game. We have talked about drafting a little bit in other games, but this is a pure card drafting game called Sushi Go. In this one, each player will have a hand of cards themed around different types of sushi, or perhaps wasabi, chopsticks, what have you. And you are going to choose one of those cards, place it in front of you, and then pass the rest of your hand to the player to the left. They will do the same, and the game will continue until everyone has played all their cards in front of them. You're going to score points depending on what those cards are. So some of them might want to be in pairs, some of them might just be worth points on their own, or there's something like the pudding cards, in which case you need to have the most of them at the end of the game in order to score points for them. So you're constantly trying to figure out which cards are better for you to play because you don't necessarily know what's coming to you from the next player to your right, and you also don't know what other people have already taken, so maybe it's too late to go for that. So there's a little bit of push your luck in trying to figure out how you should go about it. A great introduction to drafting games, one of the most popular ones out there is Seven Wonders, which is also a good kind of next step if you like this style of game.
I love the drafting mechanic and how it pops up in other games, but both of these, in particular Sushi Go, I think are great ways to really learn how to draft and understand like when is it time to go all in on something or pass it, or look at your opponent and know what card to pick so they have to make the hard choice. And Sushi Go in particular has really adorable artwork that everyone should enjoy seeing at the table. Now, maybe you want to be a little bit meaner, and that's where the resistance comes in. In this game, you're going to have 2 teams. And the trick, though, is one team is hidden from everyone else. And when it's your turn, you're going to choose party members to help you go on a quest or a mission. And the people on that mission will just secretly put in a card that says pass or fail. One team wants to get 3 missions to pass completely. The other team wants to just fail everything. And it's really a goal of trying to find out who's the villain in the group, so to speak, and try to make sure they don't go on the missions while the villains want to make sure they fail everything, or possibly find the person who knows everything depending on the variants. There is a version of this called the Resistance Avalon, which is the same thing but with a Camelot theme going on, but it's the same idea of traders. If you ever played a lot of games and people who love like Werewolf or Mafia, it's that, except in a card game form that has been beloved at conventions, and Jonathan as well. I mean, it's
Beloved
one of his
at
favorites.
Yeah.
Beloved at Jonathan, yes. But we would be remiss to mention its in-world sort of counterpart, Coup. Similar style game, but that's more of hidden roles and trying to get to a certain threshold of points or taking out the other players first.
Yes, both great games if you like that style of play. And Coup does have player elimination, the Resistance does not. So if you like Mafia and Werewolf, but you prefer to actually play a game for the whole time you're playing instead of just having to leave and go lie down or something, that's a pretty good option for you there. And now we are going to talk about one of the most classic of classics in our industry, and that's Ticket to Ride, a competitive train game. Players have trains of different colors, and you need to collect train cards of different colors in order to place those trains onto a map. The traditional Ticket to Ride is the United States, but of course, at this point, there are different versions. There's Ticket to Ride Europe, there's maps for almost any place that you can think of, as well as smaller versions of those games for just 2 players. And you are attempting to build your routes, which will score you points. Sometimes you need to connect from one place to another, so you have to be careful because if someone blocks off the route you wanted to take, you're going to need to find a longer way around, which is going to take a longer time to do. There's a reason this game has stood the test of time. It recently did very well in our family board game bracket battle that we did on our channel. It's a game that is perfect for families and entry-level players, but also still is sustainable for veterans.
Now, we're going to end off with probably one of the heaviest games on this list, but I still think a great pick. It's one of my favorites, and that's Wingspan. In this game, you are collecting bird cards. They're going to go in different environments, and you're going to have to pay more eggs or resources, and they can sometimes interact with your opponents depending on what's going on. This is definitely heavier than the rest of them, but it is one that has been beloved. It won a whole lot of awards recently, so much so that some people were complaining about the number of awards it won. But honestly, I think it deserves most of them. It's one of my favorites. It even has a little bit of education without the bomb telling you where they live and a little quote about what they do. I just love this game.
Yeah, this is a beautiful game. Anybody who sees this on the table is going to want to play it. And even though it's maybe slightly more complicated than most of our other picks, it's just so welcoming and appealing that you're going to want to sit down and play it no matter what stage of board gaming you're at, I think. There's a reason it's won all those awards. It's well deserved. So those are our 16 games, plus some little extras that we added as cheats, that we think are essential if you're starting out your collection right now. But we also have a Patreon page, and some of our patrons chimed in. We asked them what they think are some essential games, and these will maybe help fill out our list if you didn't have enough suggestions already. So, Jeff Klein recommended Splendor, Clank, and Noosefjord. So 3 good suggestions there, a couple that we talked about. Christopher Deanda said Sagrada, Cabo, and Point Salad. I think all good lighter games. Some more also, a couple of more filler games in there too, which I think are always good. Not a derogatory term, filler game. I use it with love. Falcon Ash K said a few games that do different things, which I think is what we tried to do as well, including Carcassonne, King of Tokyo, and Pandemic, echoing some of our thoughts. Kelly Windsor also likes Pandemic and Everdell and The Quest for El Dorado, another deck building game. Hoser 40K came in with Clank, deck building you can see pretty big on these lists, as well as The Crew and Imhotep, another one we didn't mention, Egyptian themed. Bonzo recommends maybe a twist on some old classics, these smaller and quicker versions of Ticket to Ride and Pandemic. They both have little versions that you can check out that are faster and easier to play. And he also says King Domino. And finally, Scott Armstrong recommended a few that are a little bit different from our list that maybe will depend on what types of games that you like. He says for a dungeon crawler, perhaps Gloomhaven has a lot of content. Dice Placement Role Player is a good pick. For something more general, a strategy game, Wingspan or Scythe. And for something weird, he said Too Many Bones or Thunderstone Quest or Aeon's End, again, more deck building games. I do think Gloomhaven is one that is very, obviously we're going for more entry level games, but if you are starting your collection, you're not afraid of a much heavier title, Gloomhaven might be pretty close to the top of the essential games for that list.
Yeah, it's on a lot of people's shelves now. And if you're starting, you just buy that. You're probably good for like a good few years before you finish that game and go to the next. If there's a property you like and there's a game based on it, it could be a safe bet. You know, in the past, it used to be like, oh, it's just a cash grab. They put G.I. Joe, they slapped it on some basic, really cheap game. That's not really the case anymore. If you're looking for a deck builder, Marvel Legendary is fantastic for Marvel games, So if there's something you like, that is an easy first pick because you're probably still going to be safe in getting at least an enjoyable game.
Yeah, another genre we wanted to shout out are all the escape room games that are out there. These are hugely popular right now, have been for a while. Things like the Exit and Unlock series, or even sort of more narrative driven games like Chronicles of Crime or Detective or Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. There's a lot of good options out there if you like that kind of mystery solving, puzzle solving style of game. Honestly, this list was tough to narrow down to even 16 options. You can see we barely managed that. We cheated our way through it because there are so many good games at this level.
I do, by the way, I want to quickly mention the thief in the room, so to speak. And I am wearing a shirt that even is based off of it. That's Catan. And we honestly decided that we think that is such a well-known game at this point that we weren't sure if it was worth putting on this list. We felt like that might be the game that you played to actually get interested into board games.
That was our list of games we think are essential if you're starting out your collection. Let us know if you have other options that maybe are in your collection you think are worth purchasing that everybody should have, or if you got some good suggestions from our list and maybe you're going to buy some of these later on, what you think about it. You can talk to us in the comments. Give us all of those thoughts. We will eat them up like candy.
So delicious. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoy playing board games. I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this is Roll for Crit.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and support us on Patreon. That would make us happy.
Maybe the next video is the one where Jonathan does a silly dance.